I remember when Lisa and I first discovered the lifestyle. We were young, adventurous, and madly in love. The thrill of exploring boundaries together made our connection feel electric and unique. Back then, it was about us pushing limits as a couple, experiencing new highs together, inviting some new every time. It felt like we could swing our whole life. But somewhere along the way, things changed. Maybe it was when our first child was born, or perhaps it was watching other couples in the scene fall apart. I started seeing cracks in what we'd built. The lifestyle that once felt liberating began to feel hollow. I wanted more stability, depth, the kind of love that grows stronger through shared responsibility rather than shared partners. I think we should step back, I told Lisa one evening after yet another party. The look in her eyes, that flash of defiance, should have warned me. She nodded. But her smile didn't reach her eyes. The signs were everywhere, but I chose to ignore them. Text messages at odd hours, mysterious weekends with friends, new outfits that I never saw her wear. I'd buried myself in work and our kids, pretending everything was fine. But the distance between us grew wider with each passing month. Then came the day I found a burner phone. One message led to another and another. Each revelation hit like a physical blow. Names, dates, pictures, details I couldn't unknow. The truth unfolded like a grotesque origami. 12 men, 2 women, countless lies. Some of these people I knew. Faces from our past adventures now tainted with betrayal. One was even a co-worker of hers. She hadn't just broken our marriage vows, she'd shattered the very foundation of trust we'd built our life upon. The irony wasn't lost on me. The lifestyle I'd once embraced had become the weapon of my undoing. Every memory of our past explorations turned sour, poisoned by the knowledge that what started as consensual exploration had morphed into something dark and secretive. I confronted her late one night, after the kids were asleep, spread the evidence across our kitchen table, the same table where we'd planned our future together. Her face changed as she realized what lay before her. No denial, no tears, just a cold acceptance that made my stomach turn. "I never meant to hurt you," she said, as if that somehow made it better. But the truth hung between us like a guillotine blade. She hadn't stopped because she never wanted to. My desire for monogamy had become her excuse for deception. The shame hit hardest in quiet moments. I'd helped open this door, thinking we could close it together when the time came. Now I stood alone in the wreckage of what we'd built, wondering how to protect our children from the fallout of our choices. I noticed something was wrong with Emily during her swim practice. My usually energetic 8-year-old could barely make it across the pool. The bruises on her legs that wouldn't heal. The constant fatigue. When the doctor said leukemia, my world stopped spinning. The first few weeks were a blur of hospital visits, tests, and trying to explain to Emily why she had to stay in bed instead of playing with her friends. Our youngest, Tommy, didn't understand why his sister couldn't come home. I'd spend nights researching treatments, insurance coverage, anything that could help us fight this battle. Lisa wasn't there for any of it. She'd show up at the hospital smelling like vodka, making the nurses uncomfortable with her loud voice and unsteady movements. One time she knocked over Emily's IV stand trying to give her a hug. I had to ask her to leave. The drinking got worse. I'd come home from the hospital to find empty bottles hidden in the laundry basket under the sink behind the toilet. Some nights she wouldn't come home at all. When she did, she'd stumble through the door at 3 a.m., makeup smeared, barely able to stand. The breaking point came when I found Tommy alone in his room, crying because he was hungry. Lisa was passed out on the couch, an empty bottle of wine on the coffee table. He said he'd been trying to wake her up for hours. He was 4 years old, and he'd been taking care of himself all day. That night, I packed bags for both kids. Emily was due for another round of chemo anyway, so I took Tommy to Plommy's stay with Emily at the hospital. I couldn't risk leaving them with Lisa anymore. The woman I married, the mother of my children, had disappeared into a spiral of self-destruction, and I had to protect what mattered most. I sent Lisa a text telling her where we were, but I made it clear we wouldn't be coming back until she got help. She responded with a string of angry messages, calling me controlling, saying I was trying to keep her kids from her. But these weren't the words of my wife anymore. They were the ramblings of someone I no longer recognized. I was sitting in the hospital cafeteria, picking at a cold sandwich while Emily slept upstairs. Tommy played with his dinosaur figures at my feet, making quiet roaring sounds. My phone buzzed. Amy's name lit up the screen. Strange. Lisa's best friend rarely contacted me directly. "John, I need to talk to you. It's important." We met in the hospital garden 20 minutes later. Tommy was content in the playroom with the staff, and Emily had her aunt watching over her. Amy paced near a concrete bench, her face drawn and pale. She couldn't meet my eyes at first. The truth spilled out like poison. Lisa hadn't just been unfaithful, she'd been reckless. Almost every night I worked late, she'd bring strange men to our house where our children slept. Tommy and Emily left alone upstairs while their mother entertained downstairs. My hands shook as Amy continued. She tried confronting Lisa multiple times, but Lisa brushed her off, claimed the kids were fine, that they slept through everything. The more Amy spoke, the more my stomach turned. Last week was the final straw. Amy's voice cracked. I drove by at midnight and saw Tommy standing in the front window, crying. Lisa was passed out on the couch. Some guy I'd never seen before was leaving. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. The rage built in my chest, hot and suffocating. All those nights I'd called to check in, Lisa had claimed everything was fine. She'd put our babies at risk, left them vulnerable to complete strangers. The betrayal of our marriage was one thing, but this was unforgivable. I should have told you sooner. Amy wiped her eyes. I kept hoping she'd stop, that she'd get help. But she's getting worse. And those kids. I couldn't speak. Every memory of the past months shifted, revealing new horrors. How many nights had my children been afraid? How many strangers had walked past their rooms? How much trauma did they experience? My hands clenched into fists. The anger threatened to overwhelm me, but Emily's face flashed in my mind. My sick little girl fighting so hard upstairs, Tommy playing innocently in the hospital playroom. They needed me clear-headed. They needed me focused on protecting them, not lost in rage at their mother. After hanging up with Amy, my legs felt like lead as I walked back to Emily's room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the sanitized walls. I couldn't get the image out of my head. Tommy crying alone while Lisa lay drunk downstairs with some stranger. My son needed protection. My daughter needed stability. And I knew exactly what I had to do. I waited until Emily fell asleep that evening, her small frame dwarfed by the hospital bed. I kissed her forehead, told the night nurse I'd be back in the morning, and drove home. The house lights were on, music thumping through the walls. My key slid into the lock like a knife. The living room reeked of alcohol and cheap cologne. Lisa sprawled on our couch, drink in hand, while some guy I'd never seen before sat uncomfortably close to her. Their heads snapped toward me as I flipped on the overhead light. "Get out," I said to the stranger. He looked at Lisa, who shot up from the couch. "What the fuck are you doing here?" She slurred, stumbling as she stood. "I live here, and I'm moving back in tonight." I dropped my overnight bag by the stairs. "You can stay or go, your choice. But I'm not leaving our children vulnerable anymore." Lisa's face contorted with rage. She hurled her glass against the wall, sending shards of crystal and bourbon spraying across the floor. The stranger quickly grabbed his jacket and bolted. "You can't do this," she screamed, getting in my face. "This is my house too. You have no right to come back here and play dictator. Keep your voice down. Tommy's upstairs. Don't you dare tell me how to act in my own home. You want to control everything, control who I see, what I do." "What you do? You mean getting wasted and bringing strange men around our kids, leaving our son alone while you pass out drunk?" Her hand flew toward my face, but I caught her wrist. I held my phone up, recording app running. Her eyes widened as she realized what I was doing. "Get out! Get the fuck out!" she shrieked, shoving me hard. "I'm calling the police. I'll tell them you hit me." I didn't move. "Go ahead." She fumbled for her phone, mascara streaking down her cheeks as she dialed 911. I stood there recording as she sobbed into the phone, spinning a story about me breaking in, about feeling threatened, about domestic violence. Police arrived within minutes. I put my hands up as they entered, letting them cuff me without resistance. One officer led me to the porch while his partner talked to Lisa inside. "Sir, your wife claims you assaulted her tonight," the detective said. "Check my phone," I replied. "The whole interaction is recorded." He listened to the audio, his expression darkening. After a few minutes, he went inside to confer with his partner. Through the window, I watched Lisa's face crumple as they played the recording back to her. When they emerged, they were leading her out in handcuffs instead. Lisa thrashed and screamed as they guided her toward the patrol car. I felt no satisfaction watching her, only a deep, hollow ache for the woman I'd once loved, now transformed into someone I barely recognized. But as I heard Tommy's small voice calling Daddy, From upstairs, I knew I'd made the right choice. The days following Lisa's arrest were a blur of hospital visits and legal paperwork. I got a call from Amy one morning while sitting beside Emily's bed, watching her sleep peacefully after another round of chemo. "John, I need you to know something. Lisa's staying with me now, but it is really bad." I stepped into the hallway, not wanting to wake Emily. Amy's voice cracked as she described Lisa's downward spiral. She'd blown through hundreds of dollars at bars in just 2 days, maxing out credit cards on designer clothes and jewelry. Last night was the worst. She came home completely wasted, screaming about how everyone's against her. I recorded some of it because honestly, I didn't know what else to do. Amy sent me the video. I watched Lisa, barely able to stand, mascara streaked down her face, hurling accusations at the camera. She knocked over furniture, broke a vase, then collapsed on Amy's couch in a heap of expensive new clothes, still with price tags attached. "I can't keep enabling this," Amy said. "She needs serious help." I hung up and immediately called my bank. The joint account we'd built over years of marriage still had most of our savings. I couldn't let Lisa burn through money we needed for Emily's treatment. The bank representative was understanding. Within an hour, I'd opened a new account in just my name and transferred every penny from our joint accounts. I methodically went through our credit cards next, closing each joint card one by one. My phone exploded with notifications. Lisa had discovered her cards were declined while trying to buy more alcohol. Her texts grew increasingly hostile. "You can't do this to me. I'll destroy you. You're going to regret this." I blocked her number. My hands were shaking, but I felt nothing but resolve. The woman I'd loved, who I'd built a life with, was gone. In her place was someone who'd rather shop for luxury bags than be there for our dying daughter. The hospital's financial counselor helped me set up payment plans for Emily's treatment. Every dollar I'd managed to save would go toward giving our daughter a fighting chance. I couldn't let Lisa's self-destruction take that away from us too. Emily stirred in her hospital bed, and I went back to sit with her. Looking at her thin frame, still beautiful despite everything she was going through, I knew I'd made the right choice. Lisa could rage all she wanted. I had to focus on what really mattered, keeping our children safe, and giving Emily every possible chance to beat this. I sat in my car outside the hospital, staring at my phone as Amy's text lit up the screen. My stomach turned reading about Lisa's breakdown. She'd been crying for hours, talking about ending it all. Part of me wanted to delete the message and pretend I never saw it. After everything she'd put our family through, I had every right to wash my hands of her problems. But I couldn't. Not when I thought about Sarah and Ethan upstairs in that hospital room. They'd already lost their mother to addiction. I couldn't let them lose her permanently. I called Amy back, keeping my voice steady. "Get her to Riverside Treatment Center. I'll make some calls. Make sure they have a bed ready. John, I don't know if she'll go willingly. Tell her it's this or I press charges for child endangerment. And Amy, thank you for looking out for her, even after everything." I spent the next hour coordinating with the treatment center while my daughter slept through another round of chemo. The social worker helped expedite the intake process, knowing the situation was critical. By evening, Amy had convinced Lisa to check herself in. The next morning, I met with Marcus, my attorney, in his downtown office. The leather chair creaked as I sank into it, exhausted from another sleepless night. "This actually works in our favor," Marcus said, spreading documents across his desk. "Voluntary admission shows the court she's unstable but also demonstrates she acknowledges needing help. Combined with a police report, Amy's statement about the strangers in your house, and the financial records showing her reckless spending." He gathered the papers into a neat stack. "John, I've handled hundreds of custody cases. This is about as clear-cut as they come." I pulled out my phone, showing him the recorded confrontation with Lisa. His eyes widened as he watched. "The police have this. Filed with their report when they arrested her." "Perfect. Between this and her psychiatric admission, we can push for supervised visitation only once she completes treatment. No judge will grant her unsupervised access to the kids, especially with Sarah's condition." The word perfect stuck in my throat. None of this was perfect. My daughter was fighting cancer while my wife self-destructed. My son barely slept through the night anymore, but I had to stay focused on protecting them, even if that meant using Lisa's rock bottom to build my case. Marcus outlined our strategy, explaining how each piece of evidence painted a clear picture of Lisa's unfitness as a parent. The recordings, the financial documents, the police reports, it all formed a devastating portrait of a mother who'd chosen addiction and chaos over her children's welfare. The day had finally come. I stood in Emily's hospital room, watching her sleep peacefully after another round of chemo, when my attorney Marcus walked in with a thick envelope. The divorce papers were ready. Lisa had been in treatment for 2 weeks, and while part of me wanted to wait, I knew delaying would only make things harder. Marcus handed me the papers. She's lucid now. Best time to serve them. I nodded, feeling the weight of years of betrayal in that envelope. The walk to Lisa's treatment facility was short, just across the hospital campus. With each step, memories of our life together flashed through my mind. Not the good ones, but the lies, the strangers in our home, our son crying alone. Lisa sat in the facility's visiting room, her designer clothes replaced by standard-issue sweats. Her eyes widened when she saw the envelope. "You can't be serious." Her voice cracked. I placed the papers on the table between us. "Read them carefully. Your visitation rights are contingent on completing treatment and maintaining sobriety." She threw the papers across the room. "You bastard! You're using my illness against me." "Illness? You chose this, Lisa. Every time you brought strangers home. Every time you left our kids alone." 2 weeks later, we faced each other in court. Lisa had pulled herself together, wearing a conservative dress and minimal makeup. Her attorney painted me as a controlling monster who'd driven her to drink. Lisa sobbed on cue, describing how I'd abandoned her during Emily's illness. Then Marcus called Amy to the stand. I saw Tommy crying at his window while Lisa was passed out downstairs. Amy testified, her voice steady. A man I didn't know was leaving through the front door. This happened multiple times. Lisa's face drained of color. She hadn't expected her best friend to testify against her. Marcus presented the evidence methodically. Bank statements showing Lisa's reckless spending. The recording of her threatening to falsely accuse me of assault. Photos of empty liquor bottles scattered around our house while the kids were home. Judge Steele's expression grew darker with each piece of evidence. When Lisa's attorney tried to object, the judge shut him down with a stern look. "Mrs. Everwood," Judge Steele said, "your behavior shows a pattern of endangering your children's welfare. This court cannot ignore such evidence." The ruling came swiftly. I received full custody. Lisa's access would be limited to supervised visits, conditional on completing rehab and maintaining sobriety for 6 months. I felt no triumph, no joy. Just relief that my children would be safe. As I left the courtroom, I heard Lisa crying. But I didn't look back. My focus was where it needed to be, on Emily's treatment and Tommy's well-being. The rest was just paperwork. When Lisa and I finally settled out of court, it was like watching the last thread in a once strong fabric snap. The tension had been sitting between us for what felt like a century, weighed down by every lie, every drink she'd taken, every empty promise made during nights when our children were upstairs, asleep and innocent. After the court hearing, Lisa avoided the looks thrown her way, but there was no mistaking the hit she took to her pride. Standing in that courtroom as witnesses, her old friends, even Amy, unraveled stories that she couldn't deny. Her signature charisma and manipulation just didn't hold anymore. She had broken our family, and the world finally saw her for who she had become. In the end, though, what hurt most wasn't the public spectacle, or the few bitter words spoken in the hallways outside the courtroom. It was how miserably anticlimactic it all felt. Watching her sign the papers, her pen scratching against the settlement offer without even a fight, just giving up like that. She used to argue at the drop of a hat, always needing the last word. But not anymore. There wasn't even enough in her anymore to demand more than a pittance of the equity from the house. Not the fighter I used to know. She didn't want to go to trial. Didn't want to extend the suffering, perhaps. For once, she acted rationally, though it felt like a shallow victory. She got the smallest chunk of equity the lawyers could muster up, which wasn't much considering the debt she'd racked up before I managed to shut down the joint accounts. I got the house, primary custody of Tommy and Emily, and full financial control. She was effectively cut out, the legal equivalent of a forced exile. There was some grim satisfaction in that final financial blow, knowing that I'd secured what Emily and Tommy needed, without the risk of Lisa destroying their future. It felt like dealing with a splinter. The satisfaction lay in finally ripping it out and cleaning the wound. Lisa moved in with her mother, which suited her. I found out through a mutual acquaintance that her mum wasn't too thrilled about taking her in, but I didn't care at that point. It was funny in a dark way. Lisa's mom had always coddled her, the real enabler behind so many of her self-destructive ways. Now, they got to stew together in their toxic pot. The truth was, though, I didn't really keep up with what happened after. I didn't need to. She drifted from job to job, some retail gig here, a short stint in food service there. We didn't speak unless we had to, producing documentation to finalize custody arrangements or notifying her of a school event. Those were the only scraps of communication left. Every once in a while she'd send an email, asking to catch up or implying she'd straightened out, but I was done reading too far into it all. I'd skim past the pleasantries, forwarding anything important to my lawyer to avoid dealing with her directly. There were months when her messages were nothing at all, just another thing to delete. If she still wanted to claw back into our lives, she didn't try too hard. In those early months after the divorce, I felt something twist inside me. Bitterness, I guess. A coldness towards her that, at the time, I couldn't shake. Maybe it had been there long before. I couldn't even remember the last time we talked without resentment bleeding through. I'm not sure I even wanted that feeling to go away. It kept me focused, kept me from stumbling back into moments of weakness, nostalgia from imagining her as the Lisa I'd once loved. That person was just gone. But it wasn't all gloom after the settlement. With Lisa out of the picture, life, oddly enough, found its rhythm. Emily went into remission not long after the dust settled. And if that isn't a goddamn miracle, I don't know what is. We threw a small party to celebrate. It wasn't anything grand, just a backyard barbecue with family and close friends, Tommy chasing cousins around, Emily finally able to stomach it without feeling sick. I remember standing outside by the grill, beer in hand, looking around at everyone laughing, my kids smiling. It was like I'd finally exhaled. Stability starts with small victories, and I clung to that day like a beacon. The years that followed became a quiet sort of rebuilding process. I worked, I took care of the kids. Most importantly, we made our own routines. Saturdays were soccer for Tommy and swim meets for Emily, though once she outgrew competition, she turned more towards art. She paints now all the time. Her room's covered in splashes of color, images of sunsets, animals, abstract shapes I can't make sense of. She's always got a paintbrush in hand, and though I don't understand much about art, I realize it calms her. She doesn't talk about what happened much. Not the leukemia, not the fights between her mother and me. But when she paints, there's peace in her eyes. Tommy's been a lot more outgoing than her. Growing up, he was quieter, a bit more standoffish. But I think that's because he always internalized what was happening more than Emily. Maybe at 5 or 6, he didn't get it exactly, but kids notice things. They pick up on tension, on when things are off. Now, though, he's found his voice. Plays soccer, hangs out with friends, annoys the hell out of Emily like any younger brother should. He calls me old man sometimes when I joke about how the music he listens to is trash. Makes me smile. Sometimes when Lisa's court-mandated visitation window came around, she wouldn't even show up. It's not often, but every once in a while. She gets some supervised time. An afternoon to sit awkwardly at a park bench while the kids exchange stiff conversation before moving away to the jungle gym or swings. Tommy's more indifferent than Emily, who usually keeps things civil but distant. In truth, whatever influence Lisa had over us, over me especially, finally died off. She'd become a ghost. Just part of another world I didn't live in anymore. Any love I'd once felt was more like a splintered memory now. I'd sometimes catch myself scrolling through old photos of us, back from when we traveled, went to game nights with friends. Smiling faces with no inkling of the storm that unraveled years later. For a moment, I'd feel the faintest echo of something, like phantom pain. You know? You feel something's there, but it's not. I'd close my laptop, rub my temples, and remind myself why I lived in the present. 5 years crept up faster than I expected. These days, life was more about rituals. Mornings packing lunches for school, scrambling to find Emily's swim gear, even though she insists she put it right there, refilling gas on Tommy's soccer equipment, scheduling meetings at work, and making it to their games or practices in the evening. Weekends at the park or family movie nights. A rhythm clicked, and there was comfort in it. The chaos that Lisa had brought into our lives felt like some strange fever dream, a long, painful nightmare we'd woken up from. She was out there, somewhere, but she wasn't part of our world anymore. She existed, but only at the margins. Occasionally I'd get calls from my lawyer reminding me of her parole conditions, her having missed a payment here or there, or failed to meet some sobriety checkpoint. Each time I felt less and less. Initially there'd been anger, now it barely registered. Numbness isn't right, but there was just distance. Peace, but also scars. The bitterness never really leaves, you know? You just learn how to live beside it. But most importantly, I felt that Tommy and Emily were safe. They had a home again, a stable one. With rules, sure, but with joy and security stitched into every corner. Watching them grow into themselves, make friends, bring school projects home, none of it was marred by fear anymore. We healed, even if we skipped around the word itself. None of it would erase what Lisa had done, what she'd put us through. But those years felt smaller now, like a story ending in a book we'd closed and put on the top shelf somewhere we never had to open again. What we had, me and the kids, it was our future now. As for Lisa, well, she drifted, jumping from one dead-end job to another, barely scraping by. Amy updated me once in passing that Lisa had tried rehabbing herself again, another stint that didn't stick. I barely reacted. It was as if I had nothing left for it. She was living with her mom. Still. And that was pretty much the extent of it. Every now and then, I'd hear some rumor about her dating another guy, moving in with him, only for it to fall apart. But those stories carried no weight for me anymore. Not my problem, not my life. The day where I had to constantly watch my back, the anxiety that came with every frantic phone call about Lisa's newest escapade, those days were gone. What replaced it was far better than I could have ever asked for, my children. At peace in the kind of childhood I always hoped for them. Life wasn't perfect, but it was damn near better than what it used to be. And that was enough. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed the story, remember to like, subscribe, and comment on the video for more stories like this. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. If you have any similar stories to share, leave them in the comments and we'll make sure to bring them to life. Thanks for watching.